Hey, Jason here with something a little different this week. It's a build demo I recently did of how I build bots for my accounting firm. So did this one in partnership with Electronic. It's the RPA solution that I use for my firm, how I build the very bots that are supposed to be the bots that are gonna put us all out of business. And this is a killer use case for bots. Basically, how to build a simple bot that's gonna manage your bank rules across all of your accounting files. Make global updates across every single accounting file when you want to add a rule, remove a rule, that sort of thing. The exact thing that the big automation VC-backed companies are doing that we don't have the power to do right now through our basic accounting systems like QuickBooks and Xero. So check this one out. Let me know what you think. It has never been easier to build your own bots. You don't have to be a whiz. You don't have to code. We're literally gonna build this thing in like 15 minutes from scratch. No coding expertise required. So let me know what you think of this one. This will be a fun one. And if you're interested in building your own bots, check these guys out at electronic.com. Jason here from the Realize Accountant community with a quick bot built to help you manage your QuickBooks bank rules. Common headache for accounting firms of all sizes. How to manage bank rules across your entire client base. In a perfect world, you would have a standard chart of accounts and a standard bank rule set for each of your industry verticals. But the reality is, even if you import a standard set of rules into your accounting file, over time, those rule sets in those different files grow apart over time. And then if you want to make updates to those rules, there's no way to do so in a centralized way to push out updates to all of those company files. So what we're going to look at today is a way to iterate through your entire client list and export the bank rules for your QuickBooks Online clients. It's the first step to build a reporting system around the bank rules themselves and all of your different accounting files, and eventually a system that's keeping those rules in sync automatically. So 3 things we will touch on. First, how to simply use Electronic to export bank rules from a QuickBooks Online file. Second, how to loop through a list of clients to make that export happen for 2 clients or 2,000 clients. And third, we'll talk through how you could build out this bot even further. All right, enough talking about it. Let's hop in and build it. If you have not built a bot in Electronic before, this is a great first bot. Super simple, gonna be quick to throw together. So think about the steps involved in building a bot to do this. First, very simply, you're gonna launch a web browser, you're gonna log in, you're gonna hop into a company file, and then you're gonna navigate to the rules page, export those rules, and that's all the bot's gonna do. It's kind of as simple as that. So we're gonna take it piece by piece, starting by simply logging in to your Intuit account. So first we gotta load a web page. So I'm gonna grab the URL from my address bar in Chrome here, and on the left side of Electronic, you have all of the activities that the bot can do for you. Now this bot's gonna be working within the web browser, so I'm gonna grab the open URL activity, I'm gonna connect it to my starting block there, and I'm gonna paste the URL that I just pulled out of my Chrome window, and all that's gonna do, it's gonna launch a Chrome window with the login page in it. So we got a new Chrome window. Next, we gotta plug in our user ID and our password. So on the login screen, you've got all sorts of different elements on the web page. Each of these little things you see are an element, and if it's an input field, Electronic will let you set the value of that element. So we're gonna pop back over to Electronic and use the set element value action. So on the right-hand side, we have the properties of the activity that's currently selected. So you'll see this properties panel changes by select open URL or set element value. The first thing we need to do is select the actual element that we want to set the value of. So I'm gonna say pick element, and now I'm inside of Chrome, and you'll see as I hover over things, you get this little red border. Now I've got the Electronic Chrome extension, and it makes these elements super easy to select. So I'm gonna hover over the user ID field, I'm gonna hit Control X, and you'll now see I've got this little yellow outline around the one we've selected. I'm gonna rename this element to something helpful, say user ID, and hit save. So we've selected the browser element. Right here it shows actually a little screenshot of that element, just a white field in this case. And then we need to set the value. So what do we want the value to be in that field? I'm just gonna put my email address in. A few more options here, what browser tab you want it happening in, if you want it to wait, that sort of thing. Those are all fine. So next, we need to set the password. So I'm gonna add another activity to click on an element. I wanna click on the password field, come in here and pick a new element. I'm gonna hover over the password field, hit Control X, call it password field, save. Now we want to put the actual password in, right? Electronic's got a built-in password manager go up here to settings, credential management, and here I've got my QBO password here. This is so that your credential can be stored in an encrypted way rather than just, plain text in a value field here or something like that. So I'm gonna come down to credentials and use the get password activity and then select QBO from the dropdown. And now that password can be used in subsequent activities. So we've already clicked on the password field. Now I'm gonna use a keyboard activity and input to browser that password that we just fetched in this activity. So if I select input to browser, we wanna select the browser element that we input that value to. So we've got a drop down here of all the elements we've picked so far, user ID and password field. I'm gonna say password field. And then for the value that we want to put in there, I'm gonna select save the previous step result. What that basically does is set the value to whatever came out of the previous step. In this case, the password that we fetched for QBO. So I'm gonna connect these two steps. Now we've got the password into that password field. Last thing we need to do is just click on the login button. So I pulled in a click on element activity. I'm gonna say pick new element, and we're gonna hover over the sign in button, Control X, rename it to, login button. That should do it. Gotta connect these blocks here, and then let's hit play and see if that works as we expect. So we've got a new Chrome browser that opens up, puts my email address and user ID, password in there, and then clicks the login button. Cool. So, bit of housekeeping real quick. On any of these blocks, you can add comments. And it's a good habit to get into so that you remember exactly what that activity block is doing. So, I've got open URL selected here. Let's throw some helpful comments in here. Launches Chrome QBO login page. You'll see it adds that to the activity block here. Next, we set the value of the user ID field. Set value of user ID field. I'm super OCD, so I'm gonna arrange these. Then we click on the password field. Click on password field. We fetch the password from the credential manager. That one's self-explanatory. And then we're going to input password into field. And then lastly, click on login button. So we've got this nice little group of steps that gets us logged in. Now you've got a big old canvas here to work with. What I do is I kind of visually group them in a way that reminds me, okay, there's something happening in this group of steps. And now that we're doing something different, I'm gonna create kind of a new visual grouping of activities. So what do you do after logging in? Let's pull up QuickBooks here, and it's taking me to my QBOA view, and I've got 3 clients in here, 2 of which have QBO fields. Now, the steps here are gonna be the exact same whether you have 2 QBO files or 2,000 QBO files. The bot has gotten us this far. What are we gonna do next? Well, we're gonna open an actual company file, then navigate to the rules page and export. So for now, let's just open a single company file and do that export. After we've got that sorted out, we'll build in the logic to loop through a bunch of different files. So there's several different ways we could launch a company file. We can do it from up here. For now, let's just click this little icon here. That's gonna load the company file. And then under banking, we're gonna go to rules and then export your rules right here. And that'll give you a little Excel file. Now, usually with RPA, there's several different ways you could build this bot, and you wanna do so in the most robust way possible so that UI updates aren't going to break your bot. And one thing you'll notice here, as I'm on this rules page, you've got a rules page specific URL. So rather than navigating through this submenu, it's probably gonna be a little more durable if we just use this URL address. That gets us to the page that we want, and it's not gonna change if they change, the navigational layout. Once we're to this page, we're gonna click the down arrow and say export. So back to electronic, what is next? This has logged us in, taken us to the QBOA page. We're gonna click on that little QuickBooks icon in order to log us into an actual accounting file. So I'm gonna go back to my practice level view, and I'm gonna say pick a new element, and let's just click on this icon for now. This will let us build the downstream logic to export the rules, and this bit's gonna change when we start looping through files. So we'll just call this, QuickBooks logo, hit save. We need to connect our flow from the end of this to the top of this step. What comes after that? So we're gonna click this. It's gonna log us into this company file. And then next, we're gonna load the URL for the banking rule page. So come over to rules. I'm going to copy this URL, and then we're going to add an open URL step. Connect these two. And we're going to use the URL value that I just copied from the browser. Now, by default, it's going to open this in a second tab. QBO doesn't always play nice in multiple tabs, so I'm just going to use the first tab just to keep things simple. So that is going to open the rules page. Then we need to click on a couple of things. So click on an element. Let's go select the element that we want to click on. It's going to be this little down arrow deal here. Control X. We'll just call this rule down arrow. Save. And then we need to click on the export button. So pick a new element and export rules. Export rules button. Think that'll work? I don't know. Let's see. I'm going to hit play. It's going to launch a new Chrome browser. Put in our user ID and password. Log us in. Take us to your QBOA kind of practice view. Then it's going to click on the little icon to load that QuickBooks company file. Then it's going to load the URL for your bank rule page. Hit the little drop down and then export rules. All right, so you see it downloaded the Excel file down here. Pretty cool. How easy is that? So what we're doing right now is just logging into a specific company file and exporting that. But what we really want is to be able to loop through as many companies as possible, right? So first, a little bit of housekeeping. Let's put some comments in here. This click on element activity is clicking on the QuickBooks logo for the company file. So click on the QuickBooks logo. Open URL is launch the rules page. And then we click the rules down arrow and click export rules. Okay, so organize these a bit. Now, inside of QuickBooks, there's a host of different ways to navigate between companies. So you could hop up here and select each company you want to go through. You could go back to the practice view, but like I talked about earlier, you always want to do so in the most robust way possible that isn't going to be impacted by UI changes. I'll show you the way that I do it. So we're in demo business right now. Let's switch to demo company 3 and watch what happens in the URL bar here when we do. So you'll see a switch company and then company ID URL. Then it loads the regular URL for that homepage. Let's do that again. So I'm going to switch back to demo company and I'm going to copy this URL. Now let's go back one more time to company 3 and see if I can use just that URL to switch to demo company. So I'm going to paste what I copied back in here. All it is a vanilla URL with an ID for that specific company file at the end. I'm going to hit enter here and we'll see if this switches back to the other company. And it does. Now that URL, that'll work from a specific company file. It'll work from your practice view. And this is the most robust way I found to navigate through different QuickBooks files. So what I've got here is an Excel file with a list of all of the URLs I could navigate to visit each of these company files. I've got 2 here. This could be any number. You know, if you have a CRM where you retain all of your client info, one item you could throw in there is the company ID of their QBO file. Realistically, if you're building out a bot like this, you're building it for a specific industry vertical. Because every single client that you have access to in QBO, you probably don't do the exact same thing for. You probably don't want to keep the rules the same on every single one of those. What you want is you have a subset of clients who you handle the bookkeeping, and maybe they're in this industry, so you use this specific rule set. And loading the client list in this way lets you be selective about which companies you're going to get into. So I'm going to close this file. And what we're going to do is we're going to hop over to electronic and we're going to load in that Excel file. So I'm going to come down here to Microsoft Excel, read Excel file. I'm going to break this path while we're moving stuff around. So I've got read Excel file selected. We're going to go out and pick the file that we want to work with, company list. And you'll see it automatically added this subsequent activity here. What it's saying is it's going to save the value to a variable called Excel content. Let's name that something more helpful, like company URL list. So all it is really is a list of company names and the URLs you can use to switch to that company. So we want these subsequent steps to run for every single row that's in that Excel file, right? Now we've got this step here to click on the QuickBooks logo. We don't need that anymore. I'm going to delete it. But we want these 3 steps to basically loop for every row. So I'm going to come down here to data tables and pull in for each row. And you'll see you get this nice little panel here. and everything inside of that panel is going to loop. So I'm gonna pull this over here, connect this variable down to our loop. I've got the loop activity selected right now, and it's using the data table saved from the previous step result. So it's basically just pulling in this variable from the previous activity. Now, anytime you do this, you need to define a template table for the data format. So think like if you upload a CSV to a system, there's a fixed template for the format that CSV has to be in. This works the same way because inside of the loop, you're able to reference each of the variables in each row. In order to do that, it needs to be in a fixed format. So I'm gonna upload another file called company list template. All this is the exact same file with two headers, company name and like launch URL. So I'm gonna use this template. Once it's loaded, there's a little show button here. So it'll actually show you how it pulled that data in. So there's column header here and variable name. So this means everything under the company name column is now available under the variable company underscore name. Everything under the launch URL header is available under the launch URL variable. And we're gonna use these variables in the steps inside of the loop. So we're gonna add a new activity here, open URL, to open the client before opening the rules page and doing all the subsequent steps. So I've got open URL. Now, how do I set the value of what that URL should be? It's gonna come from this Excel file, right? So rather than using set a value where you type something in, rather than using the value from the previous result, we're gonna calculate a value. And this is what lets you access the variables that are available. If you remember from that previous step, there was a launch URL variable. That pulls whatever's in the launch URL column for each row. So if I set the value of our open URL activity to the launch URL variable, each time this runs, it's gonna open the URL from the Excel file. Now let's connect everything downstream from this. I gotta connect these two guys and this last one. And what this should now do is loop through every single row in the Excel file, open that company in QuickBooks, open the rules page, click the down arrow, click the export button. So let's see how it likes this. We just added a bunch of stuff. Let's see how it works. We're gonna launch a new Chrome window. It's gonna log us in. Sorry, there was a problem. So something broke. Now let's hop back into electronic and troubleshoot. Where did that issue come up? It came up after we hit the login button. And if you remember, the next step then would be to read the Excel file and then open each company file. Now, I think I know what happened here. If you've used QBO much, you know that when you hit that login button, the login is not immediate. What electronic's doing here is it's mashing that login button and then immediately coming over and trying to open the first company. And I think that login just may not be complete yet. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna add an activity to have it wait until it loads that QBOA practice page. So I'm gonna pull in an activity, wait for element, move it up here. I'm gonna break this connection and then pull this guy up to here. You'll see at the bottom of this wait for element attribute, you have a yes and a no path. We're gonna assume for now that it works, and I'm gonna connect the yes path. And this basically just waits for an element to be loaded in the browser. And this could be any old thing on the QBOA page. So let's pick something over on the QBOA page for it to wait for. Come over here and indicate a browser element. Say pick new element. And let's just say Jason's test firm. So we're gonna wait until it loads that element to then try to load the first company file. So I'm gonna hit Control X, rename this to, I don't know, Jason's test firm, hit OK. And now it's gonna delay these later steps until it loads that element. Let's see if that does what we'd expect. And hit play, opens up a new Chrome window. Can log you in. Okay, now it's clearly waiting because it's loading that apps client's URL. And now you can see it did the switch company URL up at the top, navigates to the rules page, hits the drop down, hits the export rules button. Now that's the first company. There it loaded the switch company URL for the next company. And now it's going back through that same rules export. All right, simple as that. So we've got two export files right here, and it ran those steps based on the data we provided it in Excel. Now, you could feed in that data from any data source. Could be a cloud-connected CRM, could be an Airtable-based, could be anything. So that's pretty cool. How do you build on this to make it something even more useful? here's a few ideas to get you thinking. Now you've got a pile of export files that you can plug into your own data analysis tool, pull into Excel, or even build out this bot further to do the analysis for you. So how about looping through each of these files we just downloaded and building out a report, a summary of what rules are present for each client. You can then compare those rules against a master set of rules and identify one-off rules. Maybe the bookkeeper created a rule in that file that you may or may not want. Thinking through that further, you could then take that single one-off rule and send it through an approval workflow to decide either should this rule be removed from the file or is this a good rule? And we should add it to the master list and all of your other QuickBooks files. So if you think about it then, you've got this automation layer over your entire QBO client base. By simply adding a rule to a single file and then sending an approval to a manager, you can then approve that rule for distribution across your entire client base. So realistically, you're probably gonna set this up across industry verticals. You're gonna have a similar process to manage chart of accounts even. And from a single bot, you could have this automation layer that keeps all of those rules in sync across any number of QuickBooks files. Now, what does it look like to actually put a bot like this into production? It's actually pretty easy, and you don't even need this electronic studio app we've been working in to run the bot. So Electronic has an app called Bot Runner. You can install Bot Runner on any machine. You set that machine up with Bot Runner, you export this bot that you just made, and that other machine with Bot Runner can run this bot as needed. So, pretty simple, right? I think it's a great example of how quickly you can scrap together a bot that's gonna do some real work for you, and hopefully gives you a few ideas for how you can leverage bots in your own firm.